Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 1 of the Eva Academics podcast, a podcast where we discuss everything study habits related, how to continuously improve, and how to turn those lofty goals into achievable reality. I'm Sachin, head of VCE chemistry at Eva.
I'm Dalitha, head of VC biology at Eva Academics. Now, everything that we'll be discussing in this podcast are skills and techniques that Sachin and I practiced during our time in VCE, and we've continued practicing through our journey in medical school as well. Now, the focus of today's episode will be the 3 factors that ultimately decide your ATAR.
The 3 factors that we'll be discussing today are how structure beats motivation in the long run, why depth always beats coverage, and finally why feedback is so important over effort alone. So Dalitha, why is structure so much better than motivation?
Sachin, that's a great question, and I think that it's a very important one to address straight off the bat before we delve into more of the other topics that we'll be discussing, not just in this episode, but everything that comes ahead. Now, one thing that lots of students commonly raise with me in my classes, and what I've observed over the years, is that lots of students ask me, how do I become motivated? Or how do I want to do my studying, my biology? How do I want to do this practice? And I feel that's a very common issue that lots of students in BCE face. Now, at the end of the day, it really comes down to understanding how motivation isn't really a reliable driving force in the long run. It fluctuates, right? Some days you feel like you really want to do something.
Yep.
Other days it's just like, I don't want to even get out of bed, right? So grounding all of your effort and all of your study on that sense of motivation isn't a very wise way of going about VCE. Now, I wouldn't say that this is a feeling that only a certain subset of students face. It's a challenge that everyone faces, not just students, right? Whether that's students, teachers, people working, doesn't matter who it is, right? Some days you just don't feel like doing certain things. Even for me, when I was in VCE, and I'll talk a bit about when I was doing bio, this was in year 11, I didn't wake up in the morning just yearning to do a practice test or I can't wait to do VCAR 2021 or whatever, right? That wasn't the way that I woke up. If I had the choice, I would rather stay in bed, sleep, or I don't know, watch YouTube or do whatever else I want to do. So at the end of the day, it's really important to not feel like there's something wrong with me if I don't have that motivation. It's more about reframing how you think about your driving force so that you can ensure that it's consistent in the long run. Now, the ultimate solution to this problem, and the way that I approached this challenge when I was in VCE, and what I recommend to lots of my students now as well, is to really meticulously structure your day, right? So what this looks like is essentially just planning, what exactly am I going to do? And not just the subject, but what specific task am I going to do? And map that out in advance. Now, for me, I live by a very simple rule, and that's plan tomorrow, today. Right? Now, there's a couple of reasons why I decided to sort of build that habit gradually, planning tomorrow, today. The first thing is it means that I already know what to expect, right? So if today is Sunday, I know what to expect on Monday. Come home, this is exactly what I've planned out. I've just got to execute it. The second reason sort of ties back to something that I noticed in the early stages where I was trying this planning habit, where I would plan after getting home from school. Now, what I experienced in those moments is the act of simply planning made me feel productive, right? So I'd map out, right now it's 4:30, what am I going to do till I go to bed? And I'd plan that out specifically. But by planning, I felt that I had already achieved something.
It's like a small win.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of like a little dopamine hit, right? But in reality, I've done nothing. So to change the system a bit, I decided, you know what, we'll do it the night before so I can go to bed feeling really nice. Yes, my tomorrow is sorted. I know what to do. And when it comes to tomorrow, I'm functioning purely on trying to execute that plan. And that's what's giving me that sense of achievement, that sense of accomplishment. So all in all, I think that having that structure established right from the get-go is a really strong strategy to help you stay consistent, even if your motivation is sort of dwindling a bit. Because you know, at the end of the day, this is what I got to do. Just got to get home and do it.
It sounds like the basis of your point is having something that's constant and that is reliable to use as a foundation for a work ethic is much better than an emotion that can be fleeting and sometimes be there and sometimes not be there.
Yeah, exactly. Spot on. Spot on. Now, another thing that I commonly get students asking me about is how many hours do I need to study per day or per week, right?
It's a question we get every time, isn't it?
Exactly, exactly. So students would message me, they're like, oh, tell me, how many hours do I need to study to get a 40 plus study score or 45 or whatever their goal is? And what I always tell them is that it's not really about the hours that you put in. It's more about what you're actually doing in that time, right? So my question to them is always, what are you doing exactly in that time you're studying? And why did you decide to do that specific task? Why not something else? So that comes back to that idea of ensuring that whatever task, whatever study that you're doing in that time is actually optimized for your end goal, right? So it's not really something where you just decide on a whim, like, oh yeah, you know what, I feel like doing some methods today. Or I feel like doing, you know what, we'll flick through my bio textbook. Yep, this chapter looks good, let me do that. So it comes to that idea of structure once again, right? So you've got to have an idea, what's my end goal from not just this study block, but this week or this month or this term. And every day when you plan out what am I going to do tomorrow, you think, okay, what's that long-term goal that I'm working towards? And that dictates what you're going to allocate your time to tomorrow. Now, that being said, I think it's really important to come back to the idea of improvement and the difficulty in, I guess, appreciating improvement when you're in the moment itself. And this is something that students always struggle with. I struggle with myself even to this day, where you're doing something, you're chipping away at something, you don't feel that you're getting better. It's just like, oh, I'm doing the same thing over and over again. But when you look back in a week's time, in a month's time, you're like, wow, compared to where I started, I've made huge improvement. And I'm sure you've heard of this rule before as well, the 1% rule.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So the 1% rule states, as you would know, if you get better by 1% every single day over a span of 365 days, you'll be 37 times better than where you started.
Gee, that's a lot more than 365%.
Exactly. So the reason that I stress that point is because for students, appreciating that extra bio question you did and corrected and reflected on, the impact that decision had won't be seen tomorrow. It won't be seen now. It'll be seen in a couple of weeks' time. So when you're structuring your week and planning everything, keep that in mind, right? You'll feel that your plan isn't really working because you're not getting that immediate feedback of that you're improving, but really stick through it. And at the end of that block, you'll see great results.
It sounds like students have to be very conscientious with what they're trying to achieve. So being very concrete about that, but being very flexible about the timeline in which that might be achieved or in what they can actually achieve in a given day. It's almost like the vision or the goal needs to be pretty well set, but then their expectations of what they can achieve in a given moment in time should be curated accordingly.
Yeah, exactly. And also just fleshing that out a bit more, I think that when it comes to the allocation of time and decision making, when it comes to what subject do I do, what task do I do, it should really be a flexible schedule, right? It shouldn't be set in stone saying every Monday, 5 p.m. I'm doing bio. At the end of the day, it depends on what your weekly schedule looks like, what's going on at school, do you have SACs coming up, do you have exams coming up, and it should sort of change depending on that. And another factor to also consider is it's very easy when you lack structure to just default to going with what's easy or with what you enjoy doing, right? So if you're really good at, let's say, I don't know, gene expression, you keep doing gene expression over and over again because you feel good, right? It comes back to that aspect of dopamine. You're like, yes, I get this, I'm really good at it. And you just want to keep having that feeling, that sensation of you're achieving something. But that then leads to neglect of all the other topics that you also need to cover to be a well-rounded bio student or methods student or chemistry student, whatever it is. So really thoroughly planning out what the future looks like and using that to base what you're going to do tomorrow prevents that neglect creeping in. It ensures that you have a solid coverage of all the topics and you aren't letting anything slip through the cracks because, I don't know, it's difficult or you don't like doing it.
Yeah. So rule number 2 is depth beats coverage. Now, this is something that might seem obvious at first, right? Everyone knows studying in depth is better than covering things at a surface level. But I feel like what I've begun to understand over the last couple of years is why exactly that can hold true in some situations, but also what are some unexpected costs that need to be paid when pursuing depth over coverage. A question that a lot of my students often ask me during the year is they go, what's a way that I can optimize my study? Like, how can I make it, how can I get the most bang for my buck?
Yeah.
How can I get the results and study the least amount possible? And at surface level, I think that's quite a honestly good question to ask, right? Who doesn't want that? Who doesn't want the best result with the least amount of effort? But unfortunately, there are trade-offs on each side. So let's say you're someone who wants to get a high score. That is the goal starting off the year. I think that in order to achieve a very lofty goal, in order to maximize your score, there is honestly no perfect way to optimize study, and here's why. There is a law of diminishing returns. As you put more and more effort, the amount of results that you get will progressively get less. Everyone knows it's easier to get an 80% than an 85%. It's harder to get 95% consistently than just a 90%. So the amount of effort required changes drastically. Now, if we say that, doing as many practice questions as possible is depth, people might go, well, who doesn't want depth, right? It's going to get me the highest score. But there are also some costs along the way. First of all, the time requirement is incredibly higher than optimizing, right? So if you want to study in depth, you want to pay attention to every practice example, you're willing to do 20 more practice questions, even if after you've got the first 10 correct, just to search for the one scenario where you might be unprepared. Or you're trying to, make sure that on the exam, there is not a single surprise that might come about in front of you. That is going to take time and effort. That will also require a lot of situations where you may be taking time away from other things that you supposedly enjoy. So at the end, you have studied in depth, but you're also making trade-offs in terms of time. Whereas others who supposedly are trying to optimize their study and trying to get the most out of the effort that they're putting in, for these people, it might be questions like, rather than reading a whole 20-page topic booklet or the full chapter of my textbook, what are the big ideas that I need to know? What are the big concepts that would cover me in most exam situations? So I think what we can see is the goals of these two people are very different. And it's important to ask ourselves early on in the year in any pursuit, what am I trying to achieve here? Am I trying to get the most out of my time? Or am I willing to invest as much time as possible to maximize the result that I achieve? And I think answering that question early is very important to avoid following others in terms of FOMO and ultimately perhaps ending disappointed that we were pursuing goals that weren't necessarily our own.
That sounds like a really important question that every student should really be asking themselves at the start of the year before they start setting their goals and planning out the structure that we just spoke about earlier about their week, their month, their year. Now, if you don't mind elaborating a bit more, you touched on depth there and how that can help sort of maximize students' performance. How would one actually go about sort of establishing that depth in whatever subject that they're pursuing?
I think the fundamental concept of depth comes back to understanding basics, right? So I think people think depth means knowing more facts. I think we all know that if we gave someone 10 facts to memorize versus 100 random facts, both of those would actually be quite difficult. Obviously, 100 is going to be much harder. But the point is, it's not just about knowing more. It's about knowing more in an interconnected way that you can actually remember long term. And I think that comes down to understanding fundamentals. So the reason everyone knows why understanding fundamentals are very important. It means that topics link together. It means that you're not memorizing. You're not wasting energy memorizing. but rather you're investing energy in understanding, which carries forward long term. So everyone knows that this is what they should be doing. What are some reasons why people might not do it? I think the reason why people don't focus on fundamentals enough is, number one, it's an upfront investment of time that you don't see the results of immediately. It is very nice and feels very nice to go through a textbook and say, I finished a chapter, right? I did it. It's measurable. I can see it. What is much more difficult is to go, I attempted to draw a mind map today, trying to summarize everything I remember about this topic, and I had to constantly link to my prior knowledge, and at the end, I barely covered a quarter of the chapter. In terms of measurement, very poor result. But what's often hidden there is, if you keep doing this understanding of fundamentals, eventually it's an exponential curve. At the start, the return on investment is very low, but at the end, once everything clicks, you'll never forget it. As compared to people who are constantly trying to memorize, constantly forgetting, and using up a lot of energy in the process to understand complex concepts. Secondly, I think also the intention with which you approach study determines whether you like studying basics or not. A lot of people, as we were talking earlier, who often ask, what are the big ideas that I need to know about this topic? Tell me what I need to know to optimize my score on the exam. I think for these people, studying basics may not be appealing because, again, it's that upfront investment, and they're focusing on the end result, for which basics can often not be appealing. But instead, if we change the goal of wanting to, maximize our exam score to actually enjoying study and enjoying understanding how the world works, now that it's in the setting of enjoyment, I think studying basics becomes much more appealing. Because what it means is that you're not just taking information at face value. You're not internalizing information because your teacher told you. You're doing it because it makes sense. And to be honest, understanding how the world works, especially teaching a subject like chemistry, is so much more rewarding than just taking at face value information you learn at school or watching YouTube videos to cram for the next SAC or exam. So I think in terms of approaching fundamentals, number one, do it for the sake of enjoyment and understanding how the world works, not for your exam score. And number two, recognize that the trade-off of spending a lot of time for little return at the start will quickly change and pay huge dividends into the future.
And that holds true for any subject you're pursuing in VC and life as a whole, really. As if you enjoy doing it, you have that sort of underlying drive, that sort of force that moves you forward. And focusing on that depth of understanding is a really efficient way of retaining a lot of information without having that cognitive load that you spoke about earlier. And that sort of leads us on to our third rule, which is that feedback beats effort. So you sort of touched on having to put in a bit more effort to go in depth, but here we're sort of saying that feedback beats that effort. So do you mind sort of fleshing that out a bit more? What do you mean by that?
It's almost a bit contradictory, isn't it? We're telling everyone like depth works, like you need, and to study in depth, you need to trade off time and put in more effort. But here we're saying something beats effort. So let me elaborate. I think as someone approaches their study and they try and improve, you can consistently keep improving effort, right? You can improve the time that you spend. You can perhaps improve the quality of materials that you're using. Maybe instead of using YouTube, you use a textbook. Or maybe once a textbook becomes laborious, you then perhaps use a tutor's notes, which are perhaps more concise and to the point. So you can improve your time spent, you can improve the quality of materials. After a certain point, working harder and putting in more effort almost feels like banging your head against a wall a little bit, because you're putting in more effort, but the results are not actually improving. So at this point, I would say the target changes. We've learned at this point how to put in more effort. Now the goal becomes, how do I channel effort into the areas that actually need it and take that effort away from places I'm already comfortable? And that requires reflection. So when we talk about feedback, what we really mean is, what is learning at the end of the day? Learning is same situation, different behavior. In order to recount how our behavior changes in those same situations, we need to reflect. We need some sort of log about what mistakes are we making and how can we avoid repeating them into the future. A big solution I tell all my students is to keep something called a mistakes book. In that mistakes book, they should log the style of question that they got wrong, right? Was it an equation writing question? Was it a calculation question? Was it an interpreting diagram sort of question? Number 2, what was the reason they made the mistake? Was it misreading units? Was it misreading a keyword in the question? Was it not paying attention to mark allocations? And then finally, step 3, and this is the one I think people overlook. How do I avoid making that mistake in the future? Now, especially with high performers, this is one that people often skip, right? Because they know that they're capable. They'll say, oh, I'll remember this for next time. I won't repeat the mistake, right? People often call these silly mistakes. And they tend to pop up more in maths, I've noticed, than the sciences, but they still pop up in the sciences. There is no such thing as a silly mistake. A silly mistake is just a mistake that you continuously make, but have failed to reflect on and adequately change. So it's very important to introspect and reflect and go, can I actually do differently that would stop me from making this mistake in the future? Maybe it's doing something as silly as underlining a unit when you see it in a question because you know that you have a trouble with units. Maybe it's something where instead of directly attempting to solve the calculation question, you write out the steps on a blank piece of paper first so that you don't make that mistake. So that's why feedback beats effort. Because what people pursuing solely effort will do is they'll maximize effort and continue trying to crank up effort and fall into the same pitfalls. But the people with feedback will go, okay, I have this reserve of effort. Let me deploy it once to see what mistakes I'm making. And let me deploy it a second time to get around that pitfall and not fall into the same one again. So that broadly is why feedback beats effort, because with feedback, you can save up on effort to deploy in new areas of weakness. And that's why it's such a powerful tool.
Okay, so there you have it, everyone. Those are the 3 rules that determine your ATAR. Structure beating motivation, depth beating coverage, and feedback beating effort.
If you like this podcast and feel like you learned something, keep a lookout for our future podcasts on the way and stay tuned to learn more.